Good morning. You're very welcome to today's CBI at 10 webinar. My name is Kerry Thomas. I'm an editor at a news publisher called Tortoise, and great pleasure and fun actually to be doing these things with the CBI. A couple more to go before Christmas. I guess in a sense, the great exam question for the British economy is how we get high productivity and high growth. And in the end, you might argue it's a funny sort of exam question because we kind of know the answer, or it's part of the answer is innovation, but often we don't quite know how to achieve it. So the question we've set ourselves this morning is based, I think, in what we can learn from the pandemic, when businesses demonstrated great ingenuity and innovated like there was no tomorrow. How do we capture that spirit of innovation and disruption and keep it going? And one tried and tested route is creative collaborations between companies, which bring something different to the party. So there might be different cultures, different outlooks, different imperatives. The CBI has created a program called Big Fish, Little Fish, which focuses on differences of scale to help smaller firms access infrastructure and expertise so they can scale quickly by working with bigger companies, and larger companies to benefit from talent and disruptive ideas that they might be slower and perhaps might cost them more to develop in-house. So the conversation this morning is just trying to work our way through how to do those kind of collaborations between the big fish and the small fish from the perspective of the big fish and some minnows, to look at the risks, to look at the benefits on both sides, and to try and sort of plot out, if you're thinking about that kind of thing, just how to think about going into that kind of creative partnership before you tuck into it. We've got some great people to help us think our way through this. We've got Paul Batterham, who's the innovation lead at Kainos, and I'll ask Paul, for those of you who don't know what Kainos is, we'll do a little introduction in a minute or two. We've got Pippa Begg, who's the co-chief executive officer for Board Intelligence. We'll do the same with them. And we're also grateful to have with us, as ever, one of the top people from the CBI, Naomi Ware, who's the program director for innovation at the CBI. Great to have you all here. As ever on these calls, the thing that really makes them is the questions that you fire in. So do send in questions, comments, your experiences of working with a small company, if you're from a big place or vice versa. Put them in the chat. If you want us to deal with them anonymously, then just write anon at the top of your question or comment, and we will do that, of course, and we'll bring those into the conversation as quickly as we can. But Naomi, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's kick off, as we always do, with a little sort of look around to see what's been happening in the sort of business and COVID world this week. What's the I guess Omicron is the great thing on the horizon, isn't it?
Thank you. Yes, good morning, everyone. And yeah, as you say, as the festive season gets underway, members continue to grapple with short-term and urgent issues, one of them that you've mentioned, alongside some of those longer-term priorities, and needing to really juggle both of those. So first thing about some of those short-term challenges, Omicron the variant is obviously front and centre for most, and government is really in contain rather than manage mindset. And government is right to take swift action as a precaution. Keeping the economy open really must be a priority. But we need to reinforce the living with the virus mentality that we've been speaking about, and not oscillating between open and closed, so that we can really build business confidence. And obviously a key component for this will be to continue pushing for regular testing as a resource for building confidence and preventing spread. And if sectors are unable to operate due to restrictions, we really need a grown-up conversation regarding that additional support, for impacted sectors, for example, aviation. And then with an eye to the new year, risk of pandemic 2.0. So we're really being clear to government on the importance of test to release, and making sure that we've got the measures in place so that we can continue to operate. And then second, one of those pressing issues that does have really long-term implications as well is members are telling us their bandwidth is still being really taken up by ongoing labour shortages and supply chain issues. And we know these are live issues, and we're continuing to push on government on the following to help to resolve. So really thinking about some of the better targeted skills funding, more agile training to help fill gaps, ensuring the work of the Migration Advisory Committee and the shortage occupation list is regularly updated and better aligned to skills gaps. But we recognise that this must be coupled with business-focused solutions, and sort of taking a no stone unturned approach by employers. So We will be running a series of webinars via this CBI at 10 webinar platform in the new year to help firms navigate the shortages, and have done a round of kind of member engagement across the board on this issue and understanding how different businesses are addressing this and coping with this. And actually, the thing we're here to talk today about partnership is part of that as well. So things that we will be looking at include maximising talent pools, utilising tech and automation, thinking about how to refresh your people practices to boost productivity, and the best way to invest in training for your employees. So do look out for more information on that series in the new year. More information can also be found on our website. So Alice, my colleague, will post a link in the chat now on that. And as always on those issues, please do send any feedback to our coronavirus support at cbi.org.uk inbox.
Look, Alice has duly posted a link in the chat. It's a smooth machine. And Naomi, that's great. Thanks for that. It's obviously a very fast-moving situation, and we don't have all the answers yet. So we're going to have to come back to the Omicron over the next couple of weeks as we see more about its transmissibility and how severe an illness it causes. But let's tuck into today's discussion. What's the process that's got us to this point, Naomi? Give us a sort of scene setter for this discussion we're having.
Of course. So as you set out at the outset, innovation is a core part of a thriving economy, and even the challenges I've just set out around COVID, around labour challenges, innovation's a core part to tackling those. So if we think of what businesses have been doing over the pandemic, whether that's process or innovation or tech adoption to come and overcome some of the COVID challenges or hybrid working, whether that's been product innovation, thinking about sustainability or competitiveness, or whether that's thinking about business model innovation, thinking about sustainable business models. All of those different types of innovation are things that are covered as part of our wider programme of innovation here at CBI. And we recognise that all businesses have been really engaged on this over the last couple of years. And actually, it's important but not always urgent for businesses. So we're really here to try and make sure that our innovation programme can help businesses on these really important issues that sometimes don't reach the top of their to-do list in non-crisis times, to make sure that we can help businesses progress and innovate and solve some of those challenges facing them and also facing the globe. Now today, as you said, we're particularly thinking about partnership. We know that diverse teams help increase innovation, but diverse teams are also hard, and so it's no wonder that businesses are looking to work in partnership to innovate, because that brings in different ideas, different perspectives, different skills and capabilities that might not be found within one organisation. And so partnership, we're hearing from members, is increasingly a core part of innovation strategies, but it's also hard, and particularly one of the areas that we focused in on for this Big Fish Little Fish campaign, as you say, is thinking about partnerships between large small companies. As we look at these types of partnerships, there are many barriers to overcome. And so, for example, smaller firms get some real benefits from these types of partnerships, whether that's new infrastructure or additional expertise to scale quickly, or perhaps for larger companies, there are huge benefits in partnering with smaller firms. So, from new ideas, access to talent, or things that would be slower and more costly to develop in-house. And I'm sure our guests today will be able to speak about some of those very real challenges they've faced in doing that. But some of the common pitfalls, despite these benefits, are things around cultural, legal, financial challenges, which can prevent these partnerships from reaching their full potential. And in some cases, have meant that the partnerships have dissolved or not gone through. And the consequence of this is that the UK could miss out on the next world-leading innovation, and businesses can miss out on the real value they could have, either from opportunity cost or from wasted investment in something that doesn't go somewhere. So our members felt CBI could play a really active role in helping address some of these issues, and so we launched the Big Fish Little Fish campaign. So far, we've done a series of problem-solving roundtables using the CBI's convening power to bring together large corporates, SMEs, and contacts from across the innovation system to really discuss how to overcome cultural clashes, how to remove barriers to open innovation, thinking about that particular mode of partnership, and also thinking about mergers and acquisitions. How can we successfully manage those different types of innovation partnership? And using this insight, we've created a series of best practice guides in strategic partnership with Kainos, and we'll be hearing a bit from Paul later, to help firms understand how their peers have navigated these partnerships and created real value, with a real aim that for so many businesses, they have perhaps some of the knocks or the scars or the war stories, but actually there's also real benefit and reason to push through. And we want to help more members be able to have those successful innovation partnerships and perhaps avoid some of those bumps and scrapes along the way that can really hold them back. So the latest on mergers and acquisitions is being published later today, and the series so far is available on my CBI. And Alice, again, will be able to post a link in the chat so that you can access those, what's come so far, and the next one coming out later today. So in terms of next steps, Big Fish, Little Fish campaign is a real vital aspect of CBI's wider economic vision seized the moment, and will be one of our flagship campaigns to create an innovation-led economy and really help members get the benefits from innovation. So in 2022, CBI will be looking at phase 2 of Big Fish, Little Fish, and will be helping members to identify potential partners and make new connections. So really, this first phase, where we've got some of these best practice articles, is really learning and understanding from businesses what some of these challenges are and how to overcome them. And in the next phase, we'll be engaging with members in the coming months to understand how CBI can best turn the wheels to help make some of those partnerships really practically happen.
And Naomi, let me just jump in. The CBI, like everyone else, has to decide where to put its energy. And what seems to you particularly important about Big Fish, Little Fish, as opposed to, I don't know, making a shoal of little fishes or encouraging the bigger fishes to spend more on R&D? What's the particular attraction of the difference of scale that this is focused on?
Yeah, so both of those things you mentioned are really important, and some of the wider work that CBI is doing in our innovation stream plays to some of those. So thinking about our engaging with government around some of the R&D issues that make sure we've got that leverage in for business investment, or perhaps thinking about what our member offer is to some of those smaller companies so we can bring them in and they can benefit from some of the support at CBI. But actually thinking about where CBI has a real role to play is that convening power. CBI has broad reach right across sectors, industries, sizes, geographies. And how can we best use that to serve our members and the UK innovation ecosystem so that we can help really drive an innovation economy? And we felt that this was a particular area that was challenging for members, but also was something that, if got right, can create real value, and CBI is really well placed to deliver. So those other things you mentioned are really important, and some of our wider work will be involved in that, and we'll be working with partners across the ecosystem on some of those issues. But getting this right will actually be help a real driver for some of those other items you mentioned.
Great. Naomi, we'll come back to you soon, I'm sure. And just before I turn to Paul and Pippa, just to remind people on the call, I think this is one where your experiences of trying to run these kind of partnerships could be really invaluable, could help inform the CBI and inform the other guests on the call. So if you've got anything to say, do drop it in the chat and we'll try and bring it into the conversation as quickly as we can. But Paul, let me come to you. Before we sort of tuck into the meat of the conversation, for those who don't know what Kainos is, can you just sort of give us a sketch of the company and the work you've been doing with the CBI? Sure.
So, morning everyone. So Kainos is I'd say we're kind of a medium-sized software development company now. We kind of have nearly 3,000 employees, or we're headed towards 3,000 employees in 17 different offices spread around the globe. And a lot of that growth has really only happened in the past couple of years. We've kind of really grown a lot quite quickly. We work with a number of different organisations, as you can imagine. The UK government is one that we work very closely with. We're quite a large supplier to them, and we build a lot of kind of large-scale systems for them. So if you've registered to vote or ordered a new passport, or if you've had an MOT done, then the systems that underpin those processes are ones that we've designed and built. We also work with a company called Workday, I'm sure a lot of members will know, who do kind of employee record management, and we help to do integrations and deployments for them all over the world. So it's quite an interesting spread of stuff, but our kind of core capabilities are very much in the software development arena. Right, okay. So you're in an interesting position, because actually you can probably remember when you were small, even though you're medium to big now, and that might be an advantage in this conversation. So when you're thinking of working with startups and scaling companies, how do you think those
relationships can help a company like Kainos at its current stage of its sort of life cycle?
I think part of it is related to the point that Naomi made just now, is around being honestly able to understand the gaps that we have in terms of the capabilities that we've got as we scale and as we grow, and understanding how we can identify organizations that have those skills and those abilities and are working on interesting new technologies that we can bring in as part of our move towards fulfilling our strategic objectives. And I think we have a responsibility to give back to the ecosystem that we've come from. So Kainos came from a spin out from Queen's University in Belfast, and we're still headquartered in Belfast, almost right next door to Queen's University. And having come from those roots, there's very much that kind of feeling through the company that we are part of a startup ecosystem, and we are part of a community of companies that have grown out of that. So I think it's partly a responsibility to make sure that we are engaged in that community, but also understanding that those organizations can have a role to play as we grow and as we move forward.
And what, in your mind, what are the sort of models of partnership that people should think about?
I mean, for us, there's kind of three discrete models that we typically go after. I mean, there's loads of different ways that companies can partner, but the kind of the key ones that we typically come back to. So the biggest one is kind of mentoring. So we work with startups and organizations in a mentor capacity, where we've obviously got, nearly 3,000 staff who have all got, good experience, and, they're all very talented. We like to bring those talents to bear in the community. So bringing some of our product specialists or our software developers into smaller companies and helping them with not only kind of capacity enhancement, so literally putting some of our staff in to help them grow their products, to grow their services, but also to offer advice and coaching to founders and for people within the organizations to help put them on the right path, and to really encourage them to lift their head and look beyond the boundaries of kind of what's in front of them on a day-to-day basis. We have dipped a toe into kind of joint ventures and taking investments in other companies, but that's not something that has really formed a major part of our kind of strategic plan. What we are tending towards is identifying companies, as I said, that are really complementary to kind of where we're trying to go as our strategic objectives, and then working out what partnership models best fit those particular engagements, depending on the size and depending on what's involved in each case.
And Paul, do you think you're unusual in feeling that sense of responsibility to that sort of sense of social responsibility almost towards the ecosystem that you said gave birth to Kainos in the first place?
I'd like to think we weren't. I think Northern Ireland is fairly unusual in that it's a relatively small and kind of self-contained, but very kind of ambitious and fierce ecosystem there. There's lots and lots of startups who are all pushing forward. There's some world-leading companies looking at things like artificial intelligence and the impact of ethics in that sector. And so we're kind of plugged in, I think, to a really good self-sufficient community there that's really pushing at the edges. I'd like to think that there are similarities or similar approaches being taken elsewhere in Great Britain. But some, I guess, startup scenes and ecosystems are so vast and so dispersed that it might be a tough call on that one. But I'm not really sure.
Okay, Pippa, thanks for your patience. As Paul did, can you just, for the people who don't know about Board Intelligence, can you just give us a very quick sketch of the company?
Yeah, of course. So Board Intelligence specialises singly in board information. So for anyone who's ever seen a board pack, you'll think we're crazy, because they are tomes of backward-looking operational detail. And for any of you who sit on boards, you'll know that when your board pack arrives, it's probably not the highlight of your day, your weekend, or anything else. So we help ensure that boards are having the conversations they want to be, which is strategic, forward-looking, about innovation, through ensuring they have the right stimulus, the right information to provoke those conversations. Now, the reality of most boardrooms is they receive backward-looking financial operational data, and therefore the board and the exco aren't having the conversation they want to be having about the innovation agenda. So we serve over 20,000 board members, have clients from the FTSE 10 to central governments to much smaller organisations. So I suppose we work with big fish and little fish in what we do every day.
And what size of fish are you?
We are a little fish. So yeah, there are 150 of us in the team. We're fast growing. We're a tech company. So yeah, we'll be chasing Paul's tail. But yeah, we at the moment you would describe us as a small business.
Okay, so give us some war stories about how you've, good and bad, how you've worked with larger companies as your business has grown.
Yeah. So okay. So I think the best scenario for us is where you have a chief exec or chair saying, yeah, you know, we want the board and the management team to be at the best. We want to be having the conversations we need to be having. They are the sponsor and the change agent for, I suppose, for our work, but also for driving that kind of forward-looking, innovative conversation in the boardroom. So when that occurs, it kind of doesn't matter what size the organization is. It is easy to partner with them. I think the sadder thing is where where our engagements are perhaps with a general counsel or a company secretary, or maybe a head of a business unit, and they're saying, come on guys, we need to be having this more forward-looking strategic conversation. We're not, we need to change. Often then, in a big company, therein begins a procurement process. And that procurement process has been designed for ensuring minimum risk at that organization. Now, minimum risk doesn't equal fast innovation typically, okay? So we would then be part of a 6-month to year-long process where the due diligence will seek to uncover every element of, because of our technology, they need to understand our security and everything else, which is really, really important, but due diligence on the business as well. And yeah, the compliance tail wags the dog, and you complete form after form after form. You're then audited by the Big Four, who even though we are audited ourselves, we have all of the standards, central standards that we can demonstrate we comply with, that the companies want. They will audit us again. Those audit fees will probably be more than our engagement with the organisation from the time it takes. And I think the other thing is, quite often we'll talk to these companies and say, well, you know, what are you seeking to find through this? We need to do the due diligence on the technology, sure. We want to understand the culture of the organisation, okay. But then none of them will ask a question about the culture of the organisation. And I suppose the positive to that, though, I would add, is 2 years ago, we were engaged by, again, a global, large multinational FS, FTSE 20 equivalent. And they did, at the end of the process, they said, we do believe in culture, and it's between you and another provider, and we've looked on Glassdoor, and we are, you know, we're picking you. But I think, yeah, I think the glimmers of hope that we see from the larger organisations is that they are, instead of just running a compliance agenda, minimum risk compliance agenda, they're now seeking to understand a little bit more about, if you care about the culture of the organisation, if you want to understand our client satisfaction. We're never asked our NPS scores. I think it's crazy. I keep saying to these companies, stop asking me about, you know, where we filed our accounts. You can access them. Ask me about, you know, are our other customers really happy? So yeah, I think we are beginning to see glimmers of hope, and as much as we can, we are trying to influence those processes. So ask us about what our employees think, ask us about what our customers think, ask us about the, you know, our tech process, how quickly we have been able to innovate with another company to deliver them some bespoke solution. Those are the questions that you should be asking.
Yeah, and Pippa, how often are you engaging in I think what the heart of what we're talking about here, which is genuine sort of creative collaborations and partnerships, as opposed to just being, you know, delivering a service to a bigger company? And do the same sort of pitfalls that you've described apply in both of those sort of realms?
So I'd say whenever we are perceived as a service provider, and in particular wherever we are perceived as a technology service provider, I'd say that's when you have the hardest kind of procurement process, where I'd say actually what the company wants to achieve and their procurement process are out of whack in quite a big way. Where I think it's genuinely about partnership, as you say, it's quite often that process is much more about the values, what we're trying to achieve, and faster as part of that.
Yeah, Paul, let me jump back to you, because I think a lot of what Pippa is talking about speaks to a kind of a power imbalance, or a kind of awareness imbalance between a large company and a small company. I was saying before the course started, I spent a long time working for the BBC, which in theory used to think that it liked working with small independents. In practice was kind of clumsy and slightly gauche and inconsiderate in the way that it went about that very often. Particularly from your position as a company that was small not very long ago, how easy is it to put yourself in the shoes of the smaller outfit that you're partnering with, do you think?
It really depends on how we've developed the relationship. So on the previous roundtable, we brought on a chap called Cormac Quinn, who runs a company called Loyal Bee, which is a startup that we've been working with, excuse me, for the past 3 years or so. And Cormac is an ex-employee, and that's kind of the relationship. That's how the relationship started. He left Kainos to go and start this new venture, building a loyalty card that kind of uses the open banking software in Northern Ireland, and working with both banks and with retailers to offer loyalty rewards to customers. We've worked really closely with Cormac, supporting him with mentoring, as I said previously, placing people in his team, kind of giving him guidance, making introductions for him, that kind of stuff. And that's been kind of one route. So, you know, identifying people internally who are kind of going to go out and build these products or services, regardless of whether or not we give them support in-house to grow it. If it's not compatible with what Kainos are doing, we'll support them as they move out. But then also where we're engaged in startup networks in Northern Ireland, and hopefully we're going to be replicating that in some other parts of Great Britain. It's about going out and speaking to people, and we've got a number of consultants specifically in our startups kind of unit, who go out and talk at places like Ormo Baths, which is a co-working space that's got quite a number of entrepreneurs working there and startups, and offer them guidance and advice in workshop settings and in kind of seminar settings. And then very often we'll take expressions of interest from them, and then we'll sit down and have a chat with them, a chat with company founders or small businesses, to understand what their intentions are, what it is they're working on, understand how they fit with what we want to be doing and where we're headed, work out to see if there is an opportunity there, if there is some kind of value exchange that can be made. And then we'll take it forward, rather than leaping straight into, okay, let's immediately deploy some lawyers, and we'll start having those kind of conversations up front. So we try and keep quite a human face on it, and quite a personable face on it, because that's how we started. You know, it was a company born out of relationships, and it's still a company that's very much guided by relationships.
Great. Naomi, let me just come back to you for a second, because I've got a practical question in from Eunice Malik. How does a business become part of Big Fish, Little Fish, and who decides who the big business is introduced to? Can you swipe left or right, I guess Eunice is asking. What's the answer to that?
So in terms of Big Fish, Little Fish itself, so far we haven't set up what that platform program is. So actually, you know, ideas welcome, and my colleague Nathan Brown is leading on this work, and we'll be scoping it out in the next quarter. So please do ideas on a virtual postcard to Nathan Brown, and we can share his contact details on this as well. So that's very much in scope to develop. And so if you're interested in getting involved, please do. And to the point that we're discussing, actually, we as a team don't have all those ideas. It is bringing together from businesses what we can understand will be really helpful in navigating some of these challenges, and thinking about how CBI can be part of the solution to overcoming some of these different challenges mentioned. So no, we certainly don't see ourselves as kind of taking a kind of big company and saying, right, who can we necessarily introduce you to? But actually, even for CBI, I can see that this will be hoping it can be part of an innovation process for us in thinking about how can CBI partner with other organisations out there who perhaps do have platforms or ways of bringing businesses together around innovation, where we actually have that wider reach into the business community. So actually, is this an opportunity for us to do partnership and practice at CBI as well? So I think at the moment all ideas are on the table, so please do send them in, Eunice.
Great. And let me stay with you, Naomi. But I think I'm going to put this to Paul and to Pippa as well, because I think you've all got something to say about it. Sarah Brooks from the University of Exeter has written in to ask how easy industry finds it to use government innovation funding for mixed partnership building, and how they want to use higher education institutions in that partnership. I think the role of, as Paul was saying, spring out of the University of, sorry, was it Queen's, Paul?
Queen's, yeah.
But let me start that with you, Naomi. What's the role of government innovation funding, and what's the potential for relationships with universities or other research institutions?
Thank you. So I think many of these partnerships happen very separate to government innovation funding. So I think one of the things where businesses are willing to put their money into these kinds of things is where they can see the real strategic benefit for their organisation. So actually making sure that if you're looking to do partnerships, looking at what's going to be most strategically advantageous, where you've got gaps, why you might need to bring in a partner, and that can make sure that you're really nicely aligned, and so you're willing to put in that investment, and you can see the return on that. I think where government innovation funding come in is in a couple of ways. Some of it might be in de-risking risky things. Some of that might be very early stages where the benefits to that innovation or that partnership might not be retained within the company, but there's those wider spillover benefits to society and economy. There's a real case for government investment in there. So that might be if it's in things aligned with government strategic objectives around, say, towards net zero, or say pushing the boundaries on some of the key technologies where the UK's got potential for strategic advantage. Those kinds of things is where there's going to be some innovation funding available. I think so that de-risking aspect, and also it can be a means through bringing in diverse partners. To the question earlier about how can you find some of those partners, actually it can be a bit of a catalyst for bringing businesses together who wouldn't otherwise be able to meet. I think one of the challenges is making sure that that kind of funding isn't used just for kind of shovel-ready projects that would have perhaps happened anyway. That isn't what we hear is happening. For the vast majority of businesses who received innovation funding, in a recent survey we did, 70% of them said it wasn't for something that would, without that funding, it wouldn't have happened. So I think there really is a kind of de-risking and enabling aspect to that innovation funding, but it really isn't the only route. I think thinking about strategically as a business, this is for large and small businesses, where does innovation sit strategically? And I think we've got this real push both with government, which is what we're working on through some of the spending rounds, to make sure that government sees that innovation isn't a nice to have but is essential, and how do we invest long term for the future that we want. But the same question actually goes to businesses, and to sort of Pippa's point around boardrooms for those future conversations. How can we make sure as businesses, as boards, we're thinking about strategically how much do we need to invest, when do we need to invest, how can we do that for the long term to make sure that we're future fit in the areas that we need to be for our competitiveness or for our strategic goals. And so I think that conversation at a board level, making sure that as a, what's your company culture around innovation? Is it if we have anything spare, we'll pop it in? Is it the first thing to cut when difficulty comes? Or actually as an organisation, are we thinking strategically, this is where we need to be in 10 years time, and we need to make sure we're investing towards that? For some, companies or industries, it's actually the cycle is where do we need to be in 50 years time, and how do we start investing now to do that? And that's where some of those relationships with, for example, universities comes in. That much longer term thinking can be often where those partnerships are most valuable, where the that you need to be operating in that area. There's some quite high risk involved because you don't know what that will turn into, in part because of the timelines. Actually bringing in those partners with those wider skills and capabilities and kit, actually sometimes, whether that's universities or whether that's things like the Catapult centres or other types of innovation centres, that can be where those partnerships are, the pre-competitive, really, really valuable early stage innovation that companies need for the long term. That's often where some of those partnerships come in, as well as, like you say, particularly for smaller fish and those sort of hub type environments that many universities create in order to help pull through some of those startup ideas into real companies.
Yeah, Paul, I could see you nodding along at moments as Naomi was speaking there. So on that question of innovation funding and relationship with higher education institutions, what's been your experience?
Naomi's kind of stolen exactly what I was going to say, really. I mean, one of the challenges that we have as an organisation is that when we want to engage with academia and we want to, access some of that government funding, which often isn't the driver for us to access the funding. It's more to access the thinking and to access the outputs of that and have that contribute to what we're growing as an organisation. Academia and kind of academic institutions work on a completely different timescale to what we're having to report on and what we're having to commit to. So we might only be looking a quarter ahead, a year ahead, whereas if we go and engage with a research program, that might be on a 3-year cycle or a 5-year cycle or a 10-year cycle, and trying to align the value that it could offer is a real challenge, because we're not going to see a return on it for the next 5-10 years. How do we go back and talk to the board, or how do we talk to shareholders about this investment that we're going to make that might not pay off, but it's a hunch that we're going to try now and we're going to work with these partners? So that for me is the real kind of blocker. I guess having people in academia be more understanding of what the pressures are for a business to be able to align it to their strategic goals is a real key thing for us.
Yeah. Okay. Pippa, can I ask you a different question? But only because I'm really interested in this one. It's just come in. It's come in anonymously. But the question is, managing intellectual property is vital to these relationships. How have you managed that in the relationships that you've got?
Yeah, it's a good question. So actually, when we started the business initially, our method for delivering our work was consultancy. And there, whenever we engaged with a big organization, I'd say we were put under huge pressure around IP. Absolutely huge pressure of the big organization wants to own the IP, which again is a real challenge if it's core IP to the proposition. So we were in the fortunate space then of having no competitors, so held firm on the requirement that it is and must stay our IP, although we work with the company and enable them to utilize it. That question has become much less of an issue for us since we've moved into, so basically the way that we deliver our work is by now a technology platform. That question doesn't tend to come up, I'm going to say, kind of at all. But I don't know, Paul might have a different experience to that.
Or anything on that?
So the companies that we have worked with, we've been very clear up front about what we are intending around any IP. So very often it's been working with companies that are non-competitive in the space that we're in. More recently, there have been companies we've started to work with who are doing stuff, to do with artificial intelligence in the health sector, for example, and that's an area that we're kind of pushing into. So looking for companies that have got synergies, but we're being very clear up front about what our expectations are around what would happen down the road if IP became an issue, or if it became something that we would look at acquiring or merging the business into us. We're very clear about that up front based on what we know at the time. I think one of the key things we've learned from working with a number of small organizations is making sure that we don't crush them with process to begin with. So we don't give them, here's a big thick contract that we would typically use for engaging with the government or one of our other big commercial clients, and we've produced much slimmer legal documents to make sure that we can get very quickly to developing the value in the relationship, and then we iterate from there.
Pippa, let me come back to you, because Michael Collington seems to have been applauding at home while you were talking earlier on. So he says that when you were talking about the sort of some of the trials and tribulations of dealing with the larger companies, bang on, Pippa, he says, we're a small software and services company specializing in management development of bespoke software. We work with a number of larger organizations under a broad range of engagement models. We really struggle where an organization sees this as a little fish. The parent-child nature of those type of relationships and the lack of transparency leads to friction. I think when you were talking, you, at least at the end, seemed to me, it was a more optimistic tone, that you felt like you were getting to a place with your bigger partners where they were thinking more broadly about your company, more interested in stuff that wasn't kind of they could just go and look at. How have you improved the relationships with the larger companies, do you think?
So, having learned a few things and put in place a few rules. So the business sponsor is critical and can make things happen. Where an organisation has a procurement process that says the business sponsor is now not engaged, procurement are now going to run this, we say, I'm really sorry, we can't partner with you. We absolutely, like, if they're, as an organisation, if they are not willing to keep the business sponsor involved in the procurement process, then I think we are not willing to kind of be part of it.
Does it matter where in the hierarchy that business sponsor sits?
So yes and no. So one of the things is, I suppose, because we're in the fortunate position that quite often our buyer is very senior. I know that when those things get escalated, then magically things can occur in businesses. So where our business sponsor isn't maybe at main board, we're very clear at the outset, which is we expect this is going to come up across the process. How committed to you are this? Sorry, how committed to doing this are you? How much support have you got through the organisation? If this occurs, will we be able to lean on whoever it might be, CEO or CFO at group level, to say, yes, this is something we need to do and want to do, and this is how we're going to do it. So that's not to try and circumnavigate anyone's procurement process. It's just to ensure that, I think what we have learned is where procurement run the process and exclude the business sponsor and the business, that never ends in a positive place for us. And I think the relationship it's very the relationship ends up being damaged. But and the other thing is, because I find it personally quite hard, because if you were buying Salesforce or Microsoft, you wouldn't be doing this to them. So why should, and so there is a bit that there's a big enough market. We don't need to partner with people who aren't going to who aren't going to engage in a business sponsor to business relationship.
Brilliant. Amazingly, we're nearly out of time. And so let's try to end with you, Naomi, on a positive note. Can you think of a case study where you've seen this work really well?
Yeah, so I think there are so many different modes to partnership, as sort of Paul alluded to, and I think really that cultural fit is an overarching thing that pervades then all these different types of challenges. So slightly to Pippa's point, depending on the people and that culture that you've got, and making sure you've got a good fit, can actually help you navigate some of these challenges, which is why the first of the 3 articles that you put out was around overcoming culture clash. There are real differences in pace, in level of investment, in terms of, for a little fish, it might be that's their baby, that's their IP, that's their main thing, and for a big fish, it might be just something they're looking into. And actually making sure you've got a good cultural fit and people really bought in for the same reasons, that's your starting point to then developing something good. And I think where you've got the big fish recognizing that they aren't, that power imbalance doesn't always sit with them, they've gone out to partner because they lack something, they need something. And actually a big fish that has that recognition of, why am I going into this, what's the strategic gap, and that actually puts little fish in a really powerful position as well. And one of the partnerships I heard talk about between a large corporate and a startup, they were saying at different points in that journey, one or other of the partners would be kind of running that part of the process. So it might be that you're in the kind of scoping and sketching phase, and it might be that some of that is led by the corporate. It might be that actually in the technology development phase, that's really being led by the smaller fish who's got some of that capability and IP. It might be that in the design phase, the sponsor, which is a very important person that came out through this work, can bring in, from the reach of the larger organization, some of those key people, be they in design or engineering or in the sales and marketing side of things, at those different points in the process. And so making sure that the different partners can contribute. You're doing the partnership because neither one of you could do what you want to achieve alone, and actually making sure that that is core to the offering is really important. And that business sponsor on both sides, but particularly for the larger organization, seeing their role as bringing in those appropriate parts of the organisation at different points, so that you don't hit those barriers and you can really press through to, you know, those shared aims. And, you know, there's some really practical things that are pulled out in the best practice article. So I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at those. But really, you know, there can be surprising benefits as well. So for the little fishes, actually, it might be that they can see some of those follow-on things. And successful partnerships, often there might be follow-on areas. That's the nature of innovation, which is brilliant. For the large fish, there might be some surprising benefits as well. We heard of one corporate who, you know, household name in the boardrooms of as a client and a provider for many of these firms, but were never getting in at the design table because they were just seen as a corporate supplier. And so partnering with a small innovative startup actually got them in at the, as they described, from the boardroom to the whiteboard, and they were able to be part of that innovative partnerships with some of their existing clients, opening doors for them by partnering with a tiny fish that opened doors for this big corporate. So I think be open-minded as to what this can achieve, be really strategic about why you're getting involved, and then actually those power balances and some of those really tricky things can be overcome working together. So I advise you take a look at some of the best practice articles, and we'd love to hear more from you as we develop this in the next year.
Perfect. We're just getting going. So we have carried on far too long. We're way over time, but that's because it's been really interesting and actually quite good fun as well. So Paul and Pippa and Naomi, thank you all so much for taking part and helping us with such a lively conversation. We're going to be back next week, this time 10 o'clock on Wednesday, for the final CBI at 10 webinar before Christmas, talking about the CBI's new strategic priority, which is to do with health and well-being at work and the role that companies can play in that. So before we go and tox ourselves up, we can have a thought about detoxing before Christmas. Look forward to that. Thank you all again, and we'll see you very soon.